welcome everyone and thank you for coming. Extend a thank you to Kempton Kitchen, who so willingly, Stacy, fairly last minute agreed to provide snacks for us. So thank you. It looks beautiful. For those of you who don't know me, and I think most of you do, I'm Sue Collier. I am now the current president of Kutztown Strong. My term just started in July, so I'm very anxious and excited to see what comes in the next couple of years. This evening, our plan is we're going to have Teresa Detweiler, who is a prevention specialist with the Council on Chemical Abuse, present information. After she's finished, Matt Brett will speak, and he's going to share his experience on the topic or related topics, and then we're going to have a question and answer that follows that. Okay, so with no further ado, I will welcome Teresa.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for having me. As they said, if you have a hard time hearing, please let us know, because we do have a microphone, but I will try to speak loud so everyone can hear. But I am Teresa Detweiler. I am a prevention specialist with the Council on Chemical Abuse. If you're not familiar with COCA or who we are, what we do, we are Berks County's single county authority for anything related to drugs and addiction. So tobacco, nicotine, that falls under our realm. We receive funding to provide resources and services and support and education. So we are able to do what we consider prevention education lessons in all of the school districts throughout Berks County on various topics. But of course, we're here today to talk about vaping, and that's obviously what we're going to be discussing. Of course, that's a really loaded topic. I mean, there's so much information out there. We could be spending so much time on this. So it's a lot of information. I'm going to try to narrow it down for all of you, but I wanted to just be specific that we're really talking about vaping in relation to youth. So talking about, underage vaping, because there is a difference between adult vaping and underage vaping. So of course, we're mainly concerned with how this affects our young people in our communities and how, we can hopefully help prevent some of that. So helping the children in our lives avoid vaping can prove difficult, especially when we have to work against so many outside forces like peer pressure and social media. It's not uncommon to take many wrong turns along the journey, and with all the misinformation out there regarding vaping, it's often difficult to separate the truth from fiction. But you don't have to do it alone. And that is why, of course, I'm here today, because we want to talk about how we can guide each other out of this maze so that we have all the correct information and resources needed to help our youth in our lives make the best decisions for their lives. So in order to talk about this topic, we have basically 4 different things we're going to cover for tonight. We want to first talk about the laws, which is the most confusing part. So we're going to try to get that out of the way first. But it's important to understand how these are regulated and also lack of regulations around these products. We're going to talk about e-cigarettes, or actually the proper term for that is known as ENDS, E-N-D-S. That stands for Electronic Nicotine Delivery Systems. That's a huge mouthful. Most people don't call them that. We call them vapes and all different kinds of names. We'll be talking about that and what they are, how they work, health and safety issues, because of course that's one of our main concerns. And then finally, some prevention tactics. So moving into our first topic here, which is our laws and regulations. According to the FDA, no tobacco product is safe. However, with that said, understanding how the FDA works can be very confusing. The rules and regulations, as we'll soon see, are always evolving and are tied up in federal court, which leaves consumers wondering why certain policy changes are announced, but the changes are not seen in stores or online, right? So we hear about, oh, like they said they were going to pull that product from the market, but it's still being sold out at these stores. Like, how does that make sense? So compliance with regulation and enforcement takes time. It can take years. So during the last request for changes, the FDA received 2 million requests for authorization from over 200 companies who submitted proposals consisting of thousands of pages for the FDA to review. So basically, they just don't have the manpower to go through all of this in a very timely fashion. So as stated, the FDA contends that no tobacco product is safe for adults or youth. Therefore, the FDA does not give an approval for a product to be manufactured or sold, but they grant the manufacturer an authorization to market and sell the product, which also can be super confusing. It's like, we're not approving it, but we're gonna authorize it to be sold. So that is also really confusing. It's kind of like what they do with cigarettes though, right? They say cigarettes, right, are not healthy or safe, but we're gonna put certain laws into place so that they can be sold legally. And that's now what they're trying to do with vapes. So to kind of understand the history of all of this, before 2009, the tobacco industry was overseen by various government entities, but no one agency had authority over them. So really this whole system only has been in place since like 2009. And it really didn't gain momentum until 2016. So it really hasn't been that long, because it wasn't until 2016 that the FDA started to regulate, manufacture, import, the packaging, the labeling, the advertising, promotion, sale, and distribution of all vape products. So up until 2016, nobody was regulating these whatsoever. They were just being sold, but there was no oversight, right? So in 2016, they started to look at these and say, all right, like we need to, kind of put some laws into place here. Also at this time in 2016, that was when age restrictions to purchase went into place. They put warning labels on there. So before 2016, a 9-year-old could have walked into Wawa and legally bought a vape. But now it is 21 to purchase any of these products, which we're going to talk about. There was also then this marketing of products with direct or implied claims of reduced risk could only be made after FDA review. So before 2016, anyone could make any claim they wanted about vapes. That's why, if you remember before, in the early 2000s and early 2010s, we would see those commercials where they would claim, right, that this was healthier, safer, better than smoking. We don't hear that or see that anymore because they legally can no longer make those types of claims without submitting the data to back that up. Before that, though, they could say, hey, vaping's going to help you do this and do that, but now they can't say those anymore. Yes?
Sorry to repeat.
Yeah.
Tell me again what ENDS stands for.
Oh, ENDS, so electronic nicotine delivery system. So basically it just means now vaping is included in all of this. Before that, they weren't even looking at vaping, but now they're starting to look at vaping. Also, in 2016, they started to prohibit vending machine sales. So actually, you could buy vapes out of vending machines, believe it or not, before this went into effect in 2016. So 2017, the FDA extends the deadline for research until 2022. So basically, they said, all right, all you products, all you vapes on the market, you're going to have to submit some data here. You're going to have to submit some research of what your product is and how it works and what's in it. But we're going to give you 5 years to do this. So in the meantime, feel free to sell your product, say whatever you want about your product. But at 2022, that means you have to now comply. So it was they could still do whatever they wanted up until this deadline. In 2018, however, the U.S. District Court ordered the FDA to vacate their guidelines that deferred enforcement of the regulations, and companies needed to be in compliance by 2020. So they said, no. We're not giving you until 2022. We're going to put you by 2020. everything needs to be legal by 2020. In the meantime, though, of course, when all this was going on, right? So in the midst of court actions and initial deferments on compliances, products were going unregulated. Like I said, even though they were saying they're going to start regulating them, all of them could still be sold legally, right? They could be used, right? There was no, like, we're going to, ban them until we get all the information and all the documents. They could still be sold. So they were going unregulated, and they continued use with unknown ingredients as well as unknown nicotine content because, like I said, nobody was checking this yet. So in 2017, Juul begins a huge marketing and social media campaign and presence along with other e-liquid and vape manufacturers. So the company tried to promote Juul vapor lounges and cool launch parties. Juul spent at least $1.6 million on marketing its launch and directed its marketing to the social media used by adolescents by using images that associated Juul with being cool, hip, and having fun. Juul was trying to persuade regulators that the soaring teenage use was an accident, not a deliberate marketing strategy. But of course, right, Juul really changed the game. Juul's a brand of electronic cigarettes that really opened this door for youth use because they were the first electronic cigarette to really market to kids on social media platforms that kids were using. And they knew what they were doing because it paid off, which we're going to show in a minute. But again, we need to kind of revisit our tobacco history and all of the gimmicks and tricks that Juul and these other vape brands started doing were basically what cigarette companies had been doing, prior to this for generations to get people to smoke cigarettes, mainly kids, right? They're always trying to target kids because they know, right, that nicotine is highly addictive. And if they can get you when you're young, when your brain is still growing and developing, they have a customer for life, right? So that's their whole gimmick here. But it's been since 1954 that the Surgeon General has known that cigarettes can cause lung disease. 1954, right? But they still use doctors in ads. I don't know, I don't want to date anybody, but maybe somebody remembers these ads with doctors like saying like you can smoke and it's not going to hurt your health. And Santa Claus, right? Of course, right? That's towards kids, right? They use Santa Claus in these ads. In 1970, they started to ban commercials for smoking. All right, but I was mainly a kid in like the 90s, and I still remember seeing some commercials for cigarettes, right? I remember like the Flintstones had a commercial, right? So again, they use all these types of cartoons. So with this ban in commercials, though, that kind of started in 1970 and then really played out until the 1990s, you start to see this decline in sales. Then we also get the Marlboro Man in 1970, if anyone remembers him. In 1980, research becomes more advanced and widely accepted. In the late 80s and 90s, they start a campaign as Marlboro Miles and Joe Camel Mile program, which was basically you could cash in like your packs of cigarettes for like free merchandise, right? Like for free swag. If anyone remembers, like jackets and clocks and people could get all different kinds of things, right? By turning in their cigarette packs in this program. So this started in 1993 after adult use declined to 42%, okay? We're much, much lower now, luckily. The program started to decline in 1998 with the big tobacco lawsuit settlement. So again, the late 90s was really what changed the game because that was when the big tobacco companies got in trouble, right, with the federal government, right, for lying under oath in Supreme Court. It ended up being the master settlement agreement. That money is still being used today in all of the states, including Pennsylvania. Our Council on Chemical Abuse receives funding from that money. It actually pays for a lot of the work that we do around tobacco and nicotine. We get it from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. So that money, again, is still being used for prevention and education and cessation programs as a result of that big tobacco lawsuit settlement. It's important, though, just to be aware that big tobacco, again, has a history of targeting specific populations, primarily, again, youth, But there's been other populations that have also been targeted by the tobacco industry, including African Americans, people with low socioeconomic status in urban and rural areas, Native Americans or American Indians or First Nation people, people with mental illness, unfortunately, greater risk of smoking. The companies know that, they target people like that. And also LGBTQ populations as well. They also have a greater risk. So again, all of these individuals unfortunately have been targeted by the tobacco industry. And as another ploy to their marketing is these words that they use, right? So as part of advertising, the industry used words to give this illusion of safety surrounding vaping, right? They use words to lessen the harm, right? This low risk associated with it. So vape pens, for example, like I said, are actually called ENDS, so electronic nicotine delivery systems, but people, they call them vapes, they call them pens, like they call them like these things that sound really harmless, right? I mean, I've heard kids call them puffies, like, oh, well, that sounds cute. Like, what's that? You know what I mean? Like, so again, there's this perceived low risk of harm. E-juice is actually e-liquid, right? So again, they use that word juice. And in our vaping programs that we do with young people, we ask them these questions like, why do they call it juice, right? And of course, kids know. It's like, oh, well, juice is harmless. Juice is for kids. Juice is fruit. Juice is healthy, right? There's all these, again, associations with that word juice. And so they use the word juice, right? And we have to tell kids, like, this is not juice, right? This is not like we're squeezing a strawberry and you're vaping strawberry juice, right? That's not what this is. This is chemicals, right? So again, the proper term would be e-liquid. That word vapor, again, makes it seem like a person's taking in water vapor, right? I hear vapor, I think of water, when it's actually harmful aerosol, right? So it is not actually water at all. So again, as a result of all of these marketing strategies, right, mainly the targeting of youth on social media platforms, right, and again, minimizing this risk, making it seem risk-free, we saw this soaring use, right, especially between 2017 and 2018. That was when vaping really became dominant among our middle and high school students. So we have another round of regulations, because obviously the first ones didn't work out so well, right? So it's like, wait a minute, these products are still being used. We need to crack down, right? We need better laws. So one of those laws, like I mentioned, is they increased the legal purchasing age to 21. And that happened in 2019. That is a federal law. So anywhere you go in the United States, it is 21 to purchase any and all tobacco and nicotine products. So that happened again the end of 2019, kind of right before COVID happened. So it maybe didn't get a lot of publicity, but hopefully most people are aware that that is a law. And then also in April of 2020, the FDA was granted an extension to September of 2020 because, of course, COVID happened, right? So they couldn't meet their initial deadline, but that deadline still went into effect in 2020. That again, these companies now have to submit documentation, right, in order to legally sell their product and apply for this authorization. Again, authorization does not mean approval, does not mean the FDA is saying this is safe to use. It just means that it's being authorized to legally be sold like cigarettes, okay? So again, there's gonna be some laws and regulations kind of around that. And then we also are starting to look at these flavors being banned. But unfortunately, all right, with the flavor ban, they really start to only target what we consider to be cartridge-based e-liquid products. All right, so cartridge-based would be like the Juul, all right? So the Juul, again, there's these little tiny things that look like this that contain the e-liquid that goes into the device itself. But the device itself is rechargeable, kind of like a cell phone, right? So those are what you keep putting in over and over and over again, and that's what they start to target, not these. So these are puff bars. It's just a certain brand of what we consider to be disposable vapes. And because they only start to target the cartridge-based ones, obviously these become super duper popular, right? So they start to only target the cartridge-based e-liquid products and not, again, the disposable ones. So therefore, Puff Bar, this brand, becomes extremely popular. So the FDA, again, then looks at starts to look at Puff Bar and says, wait a minute, like you still have to pull your flavored product. Now, they're not saying they have to pull all of their products, just the flavors, because they're saying the flavors are what are targeting youth, right? So obviously these flavors look delicious, right? I mean, they come in all different kinds of fruit and food and dessert flavors, right? Things that obviously appeal to kids. So they're saying you can still sell your product, but it can only come in 2 flavors, the same 2 flavors that cigarettes are allowed to come in, which is tobacco and menthol. Everything else has to go. However, Puff Bar continues because it claims that its products do not contain any tobacco, but a synthetic nicotine, which is a nicotine developed in a lab and not the tobacco leaf. So there's now this whole new wave of synthetic nicotine products that starts to emerge on the market, raising regulatory questions and health concerns as youth vaping continues at epidemic levels. In addition to the disposable e-cigarette Puff Bar and oral nicotine products. So, I mean, again, there is so many different nicotine products out there now. There's nicotine gummies, there's nicotine gum and mint, which are not the same as cessation products like Nicorette or Nicoderm. All right, these are products designed to be addictive and to give you lots of nicotine, not to help you quit. So it's very, very different. These are going to be the products that you're going to be able to buy wherever you buy tobacco, right? So like gas stations, convenience stores, not in pharmacies, all right? Necessarily. I mean, I know they still sell cigarettes in some pharmacies, but if you were to go to like a pharmacy, right, that is where, you would find the Nicorette or the Nicoderm, right? Those are considered FDA-approved medications to help people quit, all right? These are products, like I said, that are being used no different than vapes. However, they're being used orally, kind of like your smokeless tobacco, like chewing tobacco. But again, they're saying there's no tobacco in it, right? It's synthetic nicotine. So again, there's all these different kinds of products. These new products that start to emerge on the market with synthetic nicotine. And again, under this loophole, these flavors obviously can still be used and of course start to attract youth. So I actually have a video and I forgot, is there sound? Or should I just try to play it through my laptop speakers? Okay.
Come through the projector, but it probably won't be very loud.
Okay. Well, we can just try, see if this, oh, shoot, I guess I can't play it because there's probably no Wi-Fi. Is there Wi-Fi? Oh, shoot, then I probably need to connect to the Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, I didn't think about this ahead of time. How do I get on the Wi-Fi?
Top one.
Top one? Okay.
George.
What is it?
First name George.
George. Capital G.
Kirk. K-I-R-K.
Space, no space.
No space.
Capital K.
Nope.
No, capital G.
Nope.
Okay, let me start over. All right, so G-E-O.
It's publicly available.
Sorry, I totally forgot about connecting. Okay, I think this works now. Let's see if I can get the video.
And we have an update on a story we've been following very closely. It's about how some vaping.
All right, sorry, let me try to turn up my volume. It's like,
It's actually pretty
It
good.
was coming from
oh,
us.
that sounds okay?
It's
Okay,
coming through there, not the other speakers.
okay. All right, we'll do this again, I'm sorry. If it wants to work, it doesn't want to work. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Where is my? Okay.
Companies have been able to avoid FDA regulation even as they remain popular among kids. You'll recall we recently sat down with 2 men who present themselves anyway as top executives at Puff Bar. Now the company makes a range of vaping products, including sweet flavors, and it's important to point out 85% of teens who vape use products with candy or fruit flavors. The FDA had tried to crack down, banning flavored cartridges like Juul Pods early last year, but thanks to an apparent loophole, Puff Bar is still on the market. And now there are renewed questions about why that's the case. Nearly 2 years ago, it seemed like the federal government had put an end to flavored vaping products.
The new policy cracking down on the sale of flavored electronic cigarettes.
But today,
What are your top sellers in terms of flavors? Probably Cool Mix, Banana Ice, Blueberry Ice.
Nick Nanas and Patrick Beltran are co-CEOs of Puff Bar. The 27-year-olds live a fast life on social media. And they control the biggest company in America still selling the kind of fruit-flavored nicotine products popular with kids.
People always say like, they're trying to sidestep or sidestep, kind of laws. And we're not, if there's a law that would order us off the market tomorrow, we would pull our products off the market tomorrow.
In fact, the Food and Drug Administration has challenged Puff Bar before. In a warning letter last year, it told the company it did not have FDA marketing authorization required of all new tobacco products. But in February, they relaunched with what they say is a tobacco-free nicotine that doesn't fall under FDA rules.
And so you're back with essentially the same product, but the stuff inside, instead of tobacco nicotine, is synthetic nicotine.
Yes.
Pretty clever.
Yeah, I think it ended up being the better alternative.
Synthetic nicotine is created through a chemical process that does not involve tobacco leaves. So the argument is Puff Bar and any other e-cigarette that follows this model is no longer subject to the FDA's rules for tobacco products.
The FDA has just been slow and tentative, and now they're getting pumped by two 27-year-olds.
Illinois Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy has been critical of Puff Bar since early 2020.
When I go to their website and I see strawberry banana and raspberry ice and banana ice flavors being sold, I know exactly who they're appealing to. It's mainly kids.
Beltran and Manas say their products are intended exclusively for adult smokers hoping to switch off cigarettes, a market they are so dedicated to serving, they argue they had to innovate.
These loopholes have caused us to look for alternative ways to still continue to provide our customers with the products they need. We see more enjoyment with our product now. I think there's definitely less byproducts compared to tobacco, right?
What do you mean by byproducts?
Less byproduct, less toxins, less. I'm talking just purely from an enjoyment standpoint of how people are enjoying our products.
Bulk, total bulk. That's not why they're doing it.
Dr. Robert Jackler is a physician turned tobacco researcher at Stanford.
Would you call this a loophole that companies are rushing through to stay on the market?
It is an Oklahoma land rush going through a very wide loophole.
He sees the turn to synthetic nicotine as part of a decades-long effort by the tobacco industry to evade regulations.
Every time the government brings in regulations, the industry can innovate around it. They have the smartest people to think up ways of skirting and undermining the intent of regulation.
Beltran and Manas both told us they think the FDA's worries are misplaced.
But you're not saying, hold on, let's wait till the data comes out. You're just saying, sorry, FDA, I see a way around you.
Traditional cigarettes on the market right now have the FDA stamp of approval, but those are not safe. So why should the U.S. people or the people, trust the FDA to be stamping approvals for the safety of products when the FDA knowingly is allowing cigarettes to the market that are killing 480,000 people a year?
The FDA doesn't technically approve tobacco products, but it does determine whether they meet legal requirements. And the agency hasn't yet taken a stand on synthetic nicotine. On its website, the FDA admits it's possible synthetic nicotine would not be regulated as a tobacco product, adding it plans to decide on a case-by-case basis.
So is the issue here the FDA or Puff Bar?
I think it's both.
Congressman Krishnamurthy says he's working on legislation to clarify the government's role in regulating synthetic nicotine.
I will make sure that it's crystal clear in the law that they should and can regulate in this area.
But Dr. Jackler says the FDA's options are already perfectly clear.
The FDA has authority to take these products off the market. If they're not tobacco products, and that's what these companies assert, then they're a drug, and they should be taken off until approved.
Why doesn't the FDA do that if it's so simple?
That is a $10 billion question.
And I wish we could tell you a good answer to that question. We once again reached out to the FDA, and it once again declined an interview with us, saying that, quote, the FDA is actively investigating and considering how to address such products. The agency says it looks forward to working with Congress on a potential fix. The FDA has, by the way, pulled some 5 million e-cigarette products off shelves in the past couple years, and every single one of them could spring back through this synthetic nicotine loophole.
So this video was like a year old. So luckily, since all this happened, President Biden did sign a bill allowing the FDA to regulate synthetic nicotine products as tobacco products. So they're saying they still fall under that tobacco product realm. So now tobacco products under the FDA are any product made or derived from tobacco or containing nicotine from any source that is intended for human consumption. However, right, just because they say now that they can regulate them, of course, it could take still a long time until all of these products, these synthetic nicotine products, are pulled off the market. So unfortunately, a lot of them are still being sold. So basically, it's like, where does this leave us, right? Because it's like all these different things that seem to be happening, but then nothing really seems to be getting done. Oh my goodness. So right now, to date, the FDA has authorized 23 end products, so only 23. Again, applicants must demonstrate to the agency, among other things, that permitting the marketing of the new tobacco product will be appropriate for the protection of the public health. So again, they're still in this process for a lot of these products. Right now, one of the main things that a lot of times people are focusing on and it's gaining momentum is the ban of menthol. So not just with cigarettes, but it would ban any menthol product for all, any type of tobacco or nicotine. So the FDA said that is going to happen. However, it could still be up to another year before we see that finally in effect. So again, there's still all of these products that are legally, of course, being, bought and sold while all of these regulations are taking place. So Juul, just to kind of update everybody on this, right? Because I feel like we don't hear about Juul as much. Juul seemed to kind of like lose its momentum, I feel like, since COVID. And it's mainly because, again, there's been all of these lawsuits against Juul. So the FDA tried to pull Juul completely off the market. Juul, of course, then filed an appeal, right? This was, last year. And so during the appeal process, they're technically not supposed to stay on the market legally, but of course, they still are, right? They're still being bought and sold, maybe not to the same scale as they once were, but they are still, again, on the market, even though there's this temporary, kind of administrative, leave of them. They are still around, but the main thing is that there's a lot of Juul lawsuits, right? Including with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, there's all these states that file lawsuits against Juul, kind of like what happened with the big tobacco companies back in the 90s. So Pennsylvania actually is one of the states that is getting money from the Juul settlement lawsuit. I don't know all the specifics, again, of the money that the state is getting, but do know that there is some money that Pennsylvania is getting as a result of this, basically for misleading consumers and creating the youth vaping crisis. There's cause that we know that Juul deliberately marketed to young people, including obviously in our state. So that is how, this settlement happened. All right, so I know that was a lot. So let's move on from that into basically just what these devices are and kind of, how they work. So there's 3 generations of what we consider to be electronic nicotine delivery systems. They first emerged on the market in the early 2000s as what you see in the first picture. It's called Cigalikes. So basically, they looked like cigarettes, they resembled cigarettes, right? There was a strong connection to smoking, and they were really targeted to adult tobacco users, right? So current smokers, right? Who were looking to quit or looking to switch. I think the big push for this came in the 2000s because if you remember at that time, that was when a lot of indoor smoking bans started taking place. So Pennsylvania's Clean Indoor Air Act went into place in like 2007, 2008, but they were pretty late to the game. There were a lot of other states that had earlier bans, right? So again, for our adult, tobacco users and smokers, it's like, all right, you can't smoke inside anymore. Well, try this. Here's vape. You can do this in place of your cigarettes. Then came that second wave in the middle picture here. This was more of these like bulky mods or box mod styles. They're larger batteries and reservoirs. They can be rechargeable. These types of products are really popular among like certain kind of like groups of people, but not mainstream because they produce big plumes of smoke, right? So they were really bulky and kind of robotic looking. And I mean, if somebody was using one of these, like you would know it because I mean, there'd be like a cloud of smoke. There was no way of hiding this. So it wasn't again until Juul came on the market like 2015, 2016, and then really got popular in that like 2017, 2018 realm that it completely changed. Because as I mentioned, right, they really started to target their product to youth. And their product looked different, right? It resembled more of a tech product. There wasn't that strong connection to smoking, kids didn't think about cigarettes at all when they saw this, right? It came in all different, colors. You could personalize it, and it was concealable, right? So it was not easy to detect. You could hide it in your fist. There wasn't a lot of, emissions or smoke that came off of it. So it definitely appealed to young people. As we always say in our presentations that we do to students, is that it doesn't matter what they're called, what their names are, what their brands are. There's so many. I mean, again, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of these types of products on the market. So they're called all different things. There's different slangs, different terms. No matter what they look like or what they are called, they all do the same thing, right? They all have one job and one job only, and that is to deliver chemicals like nicotine into our body. That's it. They're drug delivery devices. They don't do anything else. So again, they all work the same way. They can all do the same type of damage to our bodies. So regardless of what kids are calling them or the brand names, they all can, again, work the same way. And here is an interesting video. So as you can see, right, it can be really, really tricky to know what these things look like or to know, what they are, because they can look like your everyday type things, right? They're not easy to detect at all. And so we always say like that's another way that we know that these products are designed specifically to youth, because adults don't necessarily need to hide their vaping, right? If an adult is vaping, I mean, you can legally purchase any of these products if you're 21 and over. So you don't necessarily need to hide your vaping if you're an adult. But kids do, right? Kids need to hide it from their parents. They need to hide it from school. So these products, again, are designed to be undetectable, right? They're designed to look like other things, maybe even function as other things, yet they are a drug delivery device. And as I mentioned, regardless of what they look like, they all do the same thing because they all work the same way. They're all battery powered. And that is really the main difference between these and combustible cigarettes. Is this is something that is heated by a battery. In fact, that battery produces a lot more heat actually than your combustible cigarette does. So this battery, again, heats up this stuff. This is e-liquid. Again, this is what they like to call or refer to as juice. but it is no way, no shape, any kind of juice or any kind of water. Okay, so this liquid is what contains the chemicals and the nicotine. Some of the main ingredients in this e-liquid would be things like propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and there's a whole bunch of chemicals just in these flavors, right? Flavors, again, it's all synthetic, all, man-made flavors. So again, they're just a whole bunch of chemicals. So this e-liquid, again, gets heated up by this atomizer, this coil, there's this absorbent material, there's cotton in there a lot of times, and this is what obviously comes out. It is nicotine aerosol. So that is the proper term for it. It's not water vapor. It's nicotine aerosol. So when talking about aerosol, with kids, we always, kind of make that distinction that water vapor is like what you see here in the picture, right? Again, when you're boiling that pot of water, right, that mist, that steam that's coming off of that boiling pot of water, that's water vapor. But what's coming out of these would be like what you spray out of hairspray or Lysol or Raid, right? What comes out of those cans is considered aerosol, and that's exactly what is coming out of this, right? It's actually a nicotine aerosol, which has ultrafine particles, right? Toxic chemicals in it, and unfortunately, obviously, is not safe, right? So here are some of the other ingredients that are often in these aerosol components. So we can have ultrafine particles that can be inhaled deep into the lungs. Flavorings, again, these chemicals can be linked to serious lung diseases. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Volatile organic compounds, cancer-causing chemicals. So again, no different than our traditional cigarettes. These can also cause cancer. They can cause, respiratory problems. They can cause, heart problems, all the same things. And heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead, because when you're vaping these devices, you're heating up that battery, like I said, is really, really strong, and it heats up the entire device. So you could be breathing in, metal particles from those devices. So you could be breathing in battery acid from the battery, right? All of that can go into your lungs. Now, the important thing to also make note of is that obviously these are not just being used for nicotine. And unfortunately, we're hearing and seeing in schools more and more vaping being done with other drugs, not just nicotine, right? You can vape, unfortunately, anything. The main things that we're hearing about, number one, is definitely marijuana. So, and the thing with vaping marijuana is just like when you're vaping nicotine, right? It doesn't smell like a cigarette. You're not going to get that same, like if somebody smokes a cigarette, like you can usually smell that, right? You can usually detect like if somebody's been smoking because you can usually smell that. Vaping doesn't have the same type of odor like smoking a cigarette does. It's the same thing with marijuana. So if you're vaping marijuana, again, because of the battery, that high heat from the battery, there's usually no odor, no smell, and also a lot of times there's no smoke either. So again, it's different than, smoking combustible marijuana like a blunt or a joint, because you're not going to get that same odor, that same smell of marijuana that you would when you're vaping it. So that is also why it is extremely hard to detect what kids are vaping. Not only do their devices look like everyday normal things, but also you have no idea what could be in their vape unless you were to get it tested. So some schools have like school resource officers or police officers that have the ability to test the devices and, basically, run a drug test on it to see what it contains. But unless, the school has those resources, you'd have to send it out to a lab, to know. So this is where, again, we say, it's really important to observe the student's behavior and figure out, what it is that they've been vaping. The other thing too that we're hearing of vaping more is alcohol as well. And I want to mention with the vaping marijuana too, is the devices that they use to vape marijuana can look exactly the same as the devices used to vape nicotine. So you wouldn't know just based off the device, oh, this is for nicotine, this is for marijuana, because all the devices can look the same and you really wouldn't know. But dabbing is another way that kids are vaping marijuana. It's a tiny, or anyone I should say, is vaping marijuana. It's tiny balls of marijuana wax that are highly potent and concentrated THC. It can be literally 99% potent THC, so very highly concentrated THC. One dab hit could be equal to a whole joint or more, obviously can produce an intense, dangerous high. There's other devices out there as well for vaping, things that promote, like essential oil vapes or healthy vitamin vapes or melatonin vapes. Again, none of this stuff has been, studied or researched. It's kind of like CBD. There is no regulations whatsoever. So unfortunately, you have no idea what it is or what it can do or the effects. Obviously, we, have this stance that if you're vaping anything, if you're breathing anything into your lungs other than air, other than oxygen, right, it's not meant to be there. So we shouldn't be vaping anything, right? Even if it's making these claims that, this is to help me. There's no, again, evidence or research right now that proves any of those claims. So we just want to err on the side of caution and make sure we're not breathing or inhaling anything that we shouldn't be. These are just some pictures of some products that we actually found at a local high school in Berks County. So again, just to show you some of the things, a lot of this is for vaping marijuana and other CBD products. We still found tobacco wraps that could be used for marijuana as well. Again, you still can find, lighters and cigarette packs. I mean, unfortunately, this stuff is on our school campuses, even when they're supposed to be tobacco free, right? We can still find this stuff there. So hemp is another thing that is really tricky. I don't know if there's any vape shops around here, but if you've ever gone by a vape shop, a lot of them will advertise Delta 8 or Delta 9 products along with CBD. So Delta 8 refers to a psychoactive substance that's found naturally in the cannabis sativa plant. Delta 8 also has psychoactive effects, but it's estimated to be about 50 to 75% less psychoactive than Delta 9. So Delta 9 would be what you would consider to be your kind of normal traditional THC. So it can be extracted from CBD. So CBD is one of the 113 identified cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. It's not evaluated, like I said, it's not evaluated or approved by the FDA. It's available in various forms for use like THC. So again, you have all different kinds of products, gummies, vapes, oils, dabs. I was actually it's interesting too, because different states obviously have different laws. Of course, in Pennsylvania, legally for adult use, obviously it's only medical, and I use that term loosely, right? But medical marijuana that is approved, of course, legally. But I was just visiting my sister who lives in Minnesota. Now, they do not have, what they consider to be kind of a recreational marijuana legalized there. But I was shocked at the amount of products that they have THC in, drinks, for example. If you go to a restaurant or any just kind of bar, or you could go to the grocery store and buy soda. It looks like soda or seltzer water that has THC in it. I was shocked. I was like, what? You're drinking THC. And so, yeah, so I mean, they're putting it in literally everything you can think of. And the issue with this is that it could show up in a drug test. So again, for people, just thinking of their employment and thinking of students, of course, as well, these products, again, are being marketed, for adult use. But I mean, how would a kid know, right? I mean, how would a kid know that it has it in it? So it's just something to be aware of, that there's so many products out there that, again, they're marketing it, they're selling it legally. They're saying, it's no different than CBD. But again, it does, can have traces of THC in it as well. So some of these other products, again, like I said, these are all about being, undetectable, right? So, there's watches, there's phone cases, there's pens like you saw, hoodies, backpacks, right? These are all paraphernalia. It's a vape, right? So again, obviously to be undetected, right? To conceal it, to hide it from obviously probably adults, parents in school. So moving on to health and safety, let's talk a little bit about that. So the biggest, question I usually always get, or, is what is better for you, right? Is it cigarettes or is it vaping, right? What is it? And I always say that's kind of the wrong approach to looking at this issue, because in reality, they're more similar than different. So we really want to say that they're both have harm, right? They both have risk, and maybe in a little bit different ways, but they both have cancer-causing chemicals in them. They both obviously have nicotine that we can get addicted to. Cigarettes, of course, have that tar in it, right? Vapes, though, have metal particles. So, that's not necessarily better, right? So again, just kind of having this perspective that they're both obviously can cause a lot of harm, right? They're certainly not, risk-free in either one. And when we're talking about youth use, right? Why we're mainly worried about, kids using this is, so first of all, nicotine is a stimulant. So meaning it raises your blood pressure, increases your heart rate. So when you're relaxing, your brain and your heart are calm. But when you use nicotine, your mind feels calm because again, it's filled with nicotine, which is releasing a feel-good chemical known as dopamine, but your heart is pounding really fast. It's not calm. So we're going to talk a little bit about stress later on, but nicotine is fast acting. So a traditional cigarette can get nicotine into your brain in 8 to 10 seconds. This is why it's always said that nicotine is one of, if not the most addictive drugs, because what makes something addicting is about mode of administration and how quickly it can get into the brain, right? And so again, smoking is 8 to 10 seconds. Vaping cuts that in half. So it's like 4 seconds. Your brain is getting this huge dose of nicotine all at once. And it's not only very fast to get in your brain, but it's fast to leave your brain. So that's also what makes it very, very addicting because your brain, you vape, you get all this nicotine all at once, but then you go through withdrawal. And so you have to vape again, right? And then you go through withdrawal rate over and over and over again. And obviously that is, of course, what can lead to addiction. So it's especially dangerous for teens because nicotine can harm the developing brain. The brain keeps developing until about age 25. So using nicotine while the brain is developing can harm the parts of the brain that control attention, learning, mood, and impulse control. Each time a new memory is created or a new skill is learned, stronger connections or synapses are built between brain cells. Young people's brains build synapses faster than adult brains, and nicotine changes the way these synapses are formed. Nicotine is considered one of the most addictive drugs because it works so quickly to release dopamine in your brain. The euphoria or high feeling doesn't last long. Withdrawal symptoms can start shortly after nicotine leaves the body. Because of this, and because obviously it's easily accessible, getting addicted to nicotine can happen quickly. Using nicotine during development can also increase risk for future addiction to other drugs. So again, there is that risk factor there. That's why historically nicotine was always considered, it's an outdated term now, but a gateway drug. We don't like the term gateway drug because that kind of minimizes the harm of nicotine, but it is true that using nicotine could lead, again, we're not saying that everyone who smokes or everyone who vapes is going to get addicted to other drugs or alcohol, but there is that link. Unfortunately, it can make your brain more vulnerable as a young person to other addictions. There's also a higher likelihood of developing mental health issues as well, higher risk of anxiety, depression, those kind of things. So it's like, why, we don't want our young people to have to deal with, any more issues or have to, have life harder than it needs to be, right? So obviously we want to try to prevent this, right? Protect our young people from any of this. So when we're doing our prevention lessons with kids, we do what we consider to be the Play-Doh brain. So we, show them a brand new jar of Play-Doh, right? We're like, this is your brain, right? Because it's still growing, it's developing, it's all, soft and squishy. You can mold it, shape it, do all different kinds of things with it. That's what your brain is like if you're under 25. Now, what happens, right, if I take that brand new, ball of Play-Doh and I dump glitter all over it, right? I squish it all in there. Can I ever get the glitter out, right? And all the kids are like, no, right? Of course you can't, right? That glitter now has permanently changed that Play-Doh. That is what it's like if you're putting nicotine into a brain that's still growing. It can cause permanent brain changes, right? That can be lifelong. And we don't want that, right? We want to obviously empower our kids to protect their brains, make healthy choices, and not put anything into their body, right? That could cause these lifetime changes to their brain. And as I mentioned already, right, this is kind of the cycle. that somebody can get stuck in from smoking or vaping, right? Again, the average smoker is a pack-a-day smoker, right? So that is 20 times, right, during your day, right, that you're going out and engaging in your drug use behavior. For vaping, I mean, I've worked with people that literally vaping is the first thing they do when they wake up, and it's the last thing they do when they go to sleep. They literally sleep with their vape in their hand, and they're doing it constantly all day long because the vape, I mean, it can last all day, right? It's not, you know, it's not like a cigarette that burns out. So again, we get stuck in this cycle of addiction, and it's because of this, right? Again, once we're hooked, our brain is constantly demanding that nicotine, and if I don't give it that nicotine, I'm going to experiencing withdrawal symptoms, which are not deadly or, you know, you don't have to be hospitalized, you know, for nicotine withdrawal, but it's pretty uncomfortable. If you know anyone, or maybe yourself have, you know, gone through nicotine withdrawal, tried to quit, it can be, you know, it can be kind of miserable if you're not getting any kind of support or assistance. So that's where, again, it can be really uncomfortable, make you really irritable, again, increasing that depression, that anxiety, all of that. And in teens, right, here's what it can look like as well. So I know that's a pretty dramatic, you know, approach to this. And that can look like a whole lot of things, right? I mean, that can just look like, you know, kind of like normal teenage, you know, drama or whatever, right, is going on. But the big thing is we don't want to count out that it could also be nicotine addiction, right? That again, you know, maybe the reason why, you know, they seem so, you know, irritable and upset, you know, could be that they're going through nicotine withdrawal. So we just want to keep that in mind. So it's not just our brain that we want to obviously protect. You know, like I mentioned, this is also obviously damaging our lungs. So what happens in our lungs, again, these little teeny tiny chemical particles from the nicotine aerosol get, of course, inhaled into our lungs when we're vaping. Our lungs know and recognize that these chemicals are not supposed to be there, right? So it starts this kind of like irritation, inflammation in our lungs. Our body is super smart and tries to get rid of them, right? So they send these guys, it's a type of white blood cell known as macrophages. So it tries to get rid of these chemicals. And in some cases it can, but in other cases, it can't, right? In fact, sometimes the chemicals actually kill the macrophages, kill the white blood cells. So these chemicals, again, continue to stay in our lungs, continue to cause this irritation, inflammation, and eventually over time, right, if we continue to vape more, right, these chemicals will continue to build up, and basically our lungs can like swell up and, you know, really cause difficulty breathing. And this is what we were hearing about. Before COVID, mainly in like the fall of 2019, we were hearing about these symptoms of lung injury associated with vaping, and people were being hospitalized, even dying, unfortunately, from these vaping related illnesses. And when you look at these symptoms here, I mean, this looks like, you know, like a normal cold or respiratory infection. It looks like COVID or the flu, right? Again, we don't want to like count vaping out, right? If somebody is, you know, exhibiting these symptoms, you know, ask about vaping, right? Because again, it could be related to that. It's at least worth, you know, trying to screen or, you know, trying to figure out, you know, what's causing some of this. So the main term for these e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury was known as EVALI. And like I said, the CDC was tracking this, but once COVID happened in February of 2020, it stopped tracking it. So just because we're not hearing about it Doesn't mean that, oh, this doesn't happen anymore, or this went away. It just means, unfortunately, there weren't resources to continue to track it. But of course, people can still get sick from vaping. And experiencing these lung injuries, and this real like kind of like defining feature of this, which makes, I mean, in my mind, kind of scary, is that people were experiencing these symptoms just 90 days after vaping. So unlike traditional cigarettes, where oftentimes people have to be smoking for many, many years, decades sometimes before they ever experience any kind of health consequence, for vaping, it was just 3 months. 3 months when people were ending up in the hospital. So, I mean, again, that was pretty alarming, right? That it could happen that quickly in that kind of short a period of time. And again, they would rule out, they would do a chest x-ray, make sure there was no other, infection or possible diagnosis, right? That it was specifically, these symptoms were specifically related to vaping. And why this was happening, again, there could be, this was like what people are trying to investigate and trying to figure out. And it was difficult mainly, again, because these products, there's so much variability, right? There's so, because of the lack of regulations and oversight, you can put anything in any of these. And so there's so many different chemicals that's being used, and it can vary from product to product, that it was hard to really determine what the cause was. But again, there's lipids, there's oils in these, all right, that again are not meant to be inhaled into our lungs. Again, different, chemicals like vitamin E, and also the flavorings, right? The flavorings, again, these synthetic chemicals were meant to, again, not be breathed into our lungs, and were really causing some of these illnesses. Some other additional health risks were the nicotine poisoning. Kids oftentimes call this as being nic sick, and sometimes they would even record, again, with TikTok and social media, record videos of, literally like kids passing out from vaping because the nicotine content was so high, they were falling over. Secondhand vape, just like we know that secondhand smoke, just being around someone who's smoking, of course, can damage our lungs, just being a bystander. It's the same thing, right? Just being around someone who is vaping, being in the car with someone who's vaping, being in close proximity to someone who's vaping, we are breathing in those chemicals, the nicotine aerosol from the air. Dual use. So unfortunately, what we, again, could see happening was kids who start out vaping were switching into traditional cigarettes, and sometimes using both. Sometimes, again, a lot of times it had to do with the cost. Vaping can be expensive. Cigarettes are also expensive, but again, once your brain's addicted to nicotine, it doesn't care where it gets it. Nicotine is nicotine. So vaping and smoking, again, it's producing the same effect in the brain. So for some kids, again, they would be switching to cigarettes or using both. And we don't know, again, the health risks of doing that, or what that could do to the body. There's also another lung condition called popcorn lung. A lot of people maybe have heard about this. It actually is very similar, kind of resembles what happens oftentimes in people who smoke, which is known as COPD or emphysema. Popcorn lung in people who vape do a lot of, it looks very similar. It basically goes to those little air sacs and damages them. It kind of pops them open, hence the name that it's called, which is popcorn lung. So again, causing those damages with our lungs and breathing. So finally, gotten to our last stop here, talking a little bit about prevention. So obviously, right, we want to have conversations, right? We know that parents and caregivers, right, adults in youth life who voice a strong disapproval towards any and all drug use, kids are much less likely to use. So again, as a parent, as a caregiver, you might think like, oh, these kids don't listen to me. It doesn't matter what I say, right? They're going to just do it anyways. No, it does. It really does matter. And they will hear you. That kids, again, one of the biggest protective factors is kids who have parents who grow up in families that they condone any and all drug use, right? They know my parents do not approve of this, right? They do not want me using. That really can make a difference. Also, again, parents who, like all of you here, right, who show up and do your research, right? Like, hey, let me find out more about this. Let me get some information about this so that when I do talk to the kids in my life, I know what I'm talking about, right? And again, nobody's supposed to be an expert, and you don't have to have all the answers, but even just engaging in a conversation, right? Having any kind of talk, right? It shows that you care, it shows that you're concerned, shows that you love and you want the best for them. Also talking about stress management, right? Because that's oftentimes the number one reason why kids report vaping is to help with stress. And it does the exact opposite, right? This does not help with stress in any way, shape, or form. So that's where, again, as a parent, as a role model, kind of demonstrating what are healthy ways of managing stress. Like, let's talk about this. Let's kind of put some of this into practice and figuring out what is going to work best for that young person in your life. Also talking about and teaching refusal skills. We do this in schools with our prevention lessons. We talk about ways that kids can be assertive and stand up for themselves and make good, healthy choices that keep them safe. So, saying no to peer pressure and understanding how to get out of a situation that might make you feel uncomfortable, and, where is a healthy, adult and a trusted, person that you could go to if needed. And of course, again, just being that positive role model, right? Trying, and nobody's, parenting is hard, right? And nobody has to be perfect at this. But just trying the best that we can as adults, right, to take care of ourselves, right? If we want our young people to take care of themselves and make good, healthy choices, we need to do the same in our lives, right? So I need to also, demonstrate what I want the young people in my life to do. So here's one example.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. So if you want to talk to your kids, maybe get a training.
No, you're doing it wrong. Let's go.
Baby's up.
Visit talkaboutbaby.org for tips on when and how to have the vape time.
So that was, again, just like a cute little way that the dad was trying to have a conversation with his daughter, right? Like, again, let's do something together, right? Like something that you like. It might be easier to kind of have those conversations in, if we're doing something that's, maybe fun, it's not as serious, right? Knowing that they're not in trouble, right? We just want to have a conversation. So we always talk about kind of like good ways of speaking to each other, kind of like teachable moments as well. At the dinner table or in the car, not times when people are stressed out, right? Like not first thing in the morning. That would be a terrible time to have a conversation because people are rushing around trying to get places, right? Again, we want to be doing it when people are calm, kind of like that dad, she was just sitting on the couch, and he was there and he's like, hey, like, let me, try this little dance, and then, hey, let's have a conversation. So again, there's no right way of doing this. It's just, kind of starting the conversation in whatever way feels comfortable for you. Here's another cute little ad.
Breathe and wonder, is this helping? Breathe. Now you should feel much worse. Vaping nicotine can actually increase feelings of stress. Let's call it what it is. It's a breath of stress air. See for yourself. breathofstressair.com.
So again, like I said, just educating about stress and healthy ways of managing stress. Unfortunately, at every age, we're going to experience stress. So, if they're feeling overwhelmed, if they're feeling frustrated, right, let them know that we're here to listen, we're here to help, here to build resilience, make sure obviously they have those healthy outlets to relieve stress. Again, when we're talking to, young people in our lives that we care about, right, we're not here to lecture. We're not here to, like I said, this isn't punishment, right? Ask them their thoughts, ask them their opinions, right? Praise them for, for good choices that they've made, whatever it might be. And, if they admit, oh yeah, I've vaped or I tried that, right? Like that's okay, right? But this is why we're having that conversation so that we can hopefully learn and make good, healthy choices moving forward. And so also, as I mentioned, refusal skills is another important topic to discuss and teach, just because again, that is ways of getting out of, situations that might, lead to vaping or any kind of peer pressure situation, right? So knowing how to do that, right? Like how, if somebody was trying to get you to vape, like how would you handle that, right? Like what would you do in that kind of situation? Like, would you leave? Could you call me? Could you make up an excuse, right? Or, go do another, activity, anything like that would work. And as I said, finally, being that role model, just be that supportive person in their life, and helping them, letting them know that we're here, that we care, we want them to, be successful, and we don't want them to, have these problems in their lives. So that's why we're talking to them now. And if they need help quitting, there are resources available as well, specifically for young people.
Young people know it's an epidemic. Young people know vaping is an epidemic. Young people know how addictive nicotine and e-cigarettes can be. What young people don't know is how to stop. This is how. This is quitting, the first of its kind free text message program called Truth to help teens and young adults quit vaping and e-cigarettes for good. For over 2 decades, Truth Initiative and the Truth Campaign have given young people facts about the risks of tobacco. Our digital quit smoking programs have helped hundreds of thousands of people break free from nicotine addiction. This is Quitting combines this wealth of expertise to bring you a powerful quit vaping program designed specifically for young people. It features clinically proven advice from quitting experts and support from other young people who use the program. Whether you're ready to set a quit date or are still deciding, This is Quitting gives you the useless steps to take today to start your journey to ditch your vape for good. Everyone has a cell phone, and text messaging is the preferred way to communicate. This is Quitting provides help the way you want it, anonymously and privately, and it's available 24/7 for support right when you need it. This is Quitting is easy to use. Just text ditch vape to 88709 and you're in. You'll get non-judgmental tips and advice and tons of encouragement from other young people who know what you're going through. Even if you feel like you're the only one quitting, you're not alone. Since we launched the program 2 years ago, the response has been incredible. More than 350,000 young people have enrolled in This is Quitting, and it's working. And now, a clinical trial found This is Quitting increased quit rates among young adults aged 18 to 24 by nearly 40% compared to the control. But the best news is the real impact This is Quitting has had on real people.
Love you. Thanks so much for all the help. I feel confident already.
This is amazing. I've never gotten this much support right off.
Thank you for your help, even if you're not real.
They come every day and always know you need it. This is work. This is freedom. This is the fight to the faith and nicotine-free lives. This is Quitting.
So again, there are of course resources available. If anybody needs any resources, we're always, of course, available to provide any type of assistance. We do cessation classes. Right now, mainly we're doing classes for adults, so 18 and over. But if we have young people interested, we are looking at starting cessation classes for younger people as well. This is just all of our information. So I do have a survey, if you guys don't mind taking it. I feel so bad because I know Matt has his whole presentation that he also wants to show all of you. So I don't know if you guys could take the survey quick, and then Matt, I could move my laptop for you. Whatever you need me to do, let me know. But that's all that I have. I know, I'm sorry, that was a lot. But thank you guys for being so attentive. If you don't mind, if you have your phone and just scan that QR code, or we could do it later as well, so I can let Matt do what he wants to do and get out of the way.
It says it's closed.
Oh, really? I'm sorry, try this one. That's weird. Does this one work? No. Okay, that's okay then. Don't worry about it. I will let my supervisor know because this is the only survey that I have. If not, then that's all right. We will not worry about that.
It's taking 3 minutes to people stretch, Mike short.
We want to hear from you though, because you are also a wealth of information. And I guess this is the clicker that I ended up not using.
Okay.
Right there in the corner.
Okay.
I'll just do that stuff. I didn't know while Matt was getting set up if there was any questions, comments, concerns. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure there's probably a lot of it with just the college and with that being so close, but kids are getting yes. Well, and that's the issue is unfortunately, even though this law went into place, for, you have to be 21, isn't being enforced. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these shops can still be selling underage cans if they're not getting caught. You know what I mean? Right. Right. Unless I'm curious, like with the school policy, like with kids who get caught, like what happens with those kids? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, because that would be something like we could provide like, like a program like alternative to suspension that like these kids would go get help. Oh, okay. Right. Right. It's tough. It's really, really tough. Right. Right. And that's where again, like some of it is like kind of like educating and empowering kids that like, like this is why like you should not be, you know what I mean? Like not just that, but like I know. But I think like, again, talking about the addiction piece, like how this is controlling you and like, that this is running your life. Right. Right. It's tough. It's really, really tough. But I mean, it sounds like. Oh no, go ahead. I'm just curious. Right. So there are vape detectors. There are vape detectors that can go off. I've heard, positive things. Schools that have vape detectors to turn kids from. Right, from setting up the water anytime you go into the bathroom. So. Oh. Really? Really?
Just changed hands. Now it's over 24 hours. So this is going to be the most spot.
Oh. I mean, it's just so, we're just up against a giant. It's like, we just keep trying to like chip away, like, like you're saying, like maybe this will make a difference. Maybe this time, somebody will hear us or we'll talk to the right people or, but it's like.
What was it set to?
Sometimes it just feels like we
I just turned it down and turned it on to see, make sure.
trudging through, like,
I
you
got
know,
it here.
like just keep educating and educating and educating, but yeah, I mean, it's like, it has to, like, again, society has to change it, like we did with cigarettes, you know what I mean? Like how we, I know, exactly, but it, yeah, it's a slow struggle for sure, because I mean, you know, everyone thought about cigarettes until people started actually banning it and cracking down and saying, wait a minute, like these are really I know. Oh, it's so hard.
Good. Ready? All right, for those who don't know me, I'm Matt Brett. I'm the fire chief here locally in Kempton, but my paid job is I'm the assistant chief of EMS for the city of Allentown Fire Department. So what that means is, as the assistant chief, I'm no longer running an ambulance. I'm a on-duty supervisor, so I go out and try to help on high acuity calls. One of those is overdoses. I see a lot of overdoses, and if today's slow day, 6-7 overdoses, 1 death, that's a normal day. That's a slow day. So after Teresa actually sent me her presentation, it's like, how can I do anything on vaping? Just like hit everything. So I try to like do some more what I see in the field, how things go, and then kind of this, I came up with this bridge to the unknown, because we don't know if vaping causes people to go to other things, but I think it does. I think it gives it that possibility that happens. And I'll just go over a couple things that are prevalent, things that we're seeing, trends, and see how it goes. So the one big thing that we see a lot, and this is smoking, is K2 and spice. It's a synthetic marijuana, non-regulated by the FDA, and they come in these fancy packs, no different. So we're targeting people just in a different way, mostly adults, but we see these, it's a designer drug, and it's the same kind of thing. It's a herbal incense. So here's what it actually looks like. It's most people, it's sold in these bodegas, stores, as herbal incense or potpourri. And what they do is they spray the chemical on top of it to ingrain into the chemical. And the problem is that, again, it's not regulated. So as soon as somebody cracks down and finds out what that chemical makeup is, they change it and they move on and they change it again. And what that does for myself and other providers, we have a young lady that's also a provider here as an emergency medical technician, is that we don't know what we're getting into. We don't know how that drug's going to react with the person. And a lot of times that person doesn't know either. They can be, we went through the stage that we had people that were just kind of like in that zombie land, kind of like really chilled out. We went through a stage that people were psychotic, trying to fight you. And there's no really cure for it, because we talk about, we've all been overwhelmed. We know about the opiate epidemic and what we use Narcan, but when we talk about K2, we don't know how to deal with that, because there is not a treatment. There is no reversal agent to most of these synthetic drugs. It just doesn't exist. And they're everywhere. So, I mean, I pick up the packages because we just do. So, I mean, they're out there. These are from probably the last, well, we had this program scheduled, and I'll pass them around later on. But they're pretty attractive packages. They look kind of neat. And they're all different. And then like every week you see different ones. You see them laying all over the streets, and they're around, and they're meant to attract people. So one of my things that I do I like to talk to people. So when I have people that are overdosed, if we can get them to a state that I can talk to them, I try to figure things out, ask the questions. Because if we don't know why they're doing it, it's hard to solve how we're going to prevent them from doing it more, or what gets them into that. So these are all kinds of street names. I've heard some of these, probably most of these people talk about, yeah, I'm doing Paradise or the Ninja or whatever the pack is that time. But again, pretty crazy looking packs, and these are all ones that are we find after, and you can go in, anybody, unfortunately, when you get into the inner city, they're not going to abide by you have to be 21. If you come in with $6 or $3, you can buy a pack of synthetic marijuana. They're selling as potpourri. You can go home and make your house smell great. If you want to open some of these packets, you can still smell that fragrance. I think it's kind of disgusting, but it has a fragrance. I mean, people used to burn potpourri all the time. So another way this is being abused, no different than so that we talked about earlier. You can do it the same way. It's a common route of smoking. You can smoke this. You can soak it in water, and you can, like we just went through for the last little bit, you can use electronic cigarettes to inhale these. So the effects on the body are these. So different. I wish there was one that you could say, okay, I know if I have somebody that overdoses on K2, they're going to be tachycardic, which means they have a high heart rate. But there's such a different realm of things going on, it's very difficult to treat. So the only thing I can do if somebody's in a seizure or tremor or hallucinate is that we give them benzodiazepines to knock them down so we can treat them and take them to the hospital. They go to the hospital, they get a drug test. The drug test comes up inconclusive because it's not an FDA-regulated drug. They sleep off the benzodiazepines, they sleep this off, and they're back out in the street, and the cycle continues. It's a very hard one to combat. Luckily, the ones with the currently right now, we're not seeing the ones that are fighting us. We went through a stage of 4 to 5 months that we were hand to hand with some of these patients. I mean, we had providers that lost their careers because of trying to calm these people down, sedate them. When you went through the years of the bath salts, remember bath salts and PCP. Now we're into K2. It's just this is the next cycle of drug that we're seeing. Again, no cookbook. The EDs require drug tests, but there's not really much we can do, and there's no true fix. So that's that. Moving on to another drug, fentanyl. I think it was 3-4 years ago, we talked about heroin, right? Everybody thinks heroin. I don't see heroin anymore. Heroin's kind of like not in vogue anymore. If you look at the studies in the last couple years, heroin is maybe like, as far as deaths are concerned, heroin is down to less than 10%. It's now fentanyl. And why fentanyl? It's money derivative. Before, heroin was the big thing. It was easier to get. The big crackdowns came down. It was harder to get heroin into cities. But now fentanyl, it's so easy. And it's so much stronger, and people don't know the strength of it. And it's super easy to produce. The most of it, again, up there, it's coming from Mexico. The biggest supplier is China, but China ships it to Mexico. Mexico has these supply warehouses that make it, manufacture it. So we talk about the difference between heroin and fentanyl. The thing that's scary about fentanyl is being made in a lab. At least with heroin, I mean, I hate to say that. We know where it is. It was a derivative of marijuana. I mean, we knew where it came from, and we knew how to treat it. Fentanyl is very difficult to figure out how to treat. A simple heroin overdose, we were able to fix with 0.2 milligrams of Narcan. Now, we have the Narcan ministers that some people have in their schools or have in their pockets or carry with them. The atomizers that squeeze out 4 milligrams, sometimes they have to use 2, 3, 4. I've used 10 milligrams of Narcan to try to reduce the fentanyl. It's strong, and it does take a toll on people. Not going to go through all the things on there, but it's one of the big things here in the middle is what it's being mixed with. We're seeing fentanyl coming in all kinds of things. MDMA is ecstasy. Ecstasy is a big one, especially here in the college towns. Kutztown is one of the known places for ecstasy, just because we have the university. It draws it in. We have the parties that have the ecstasy, and the fentanyl is getting mixed in it. So we have that that problem that we start putting these drugs together. And a lot of times people buy these drugs and they don't know what they're getting. And that's the difficult. Before we talked about heroin, people knew what they were buying. Now they don't, because it's man-made, it's synthetic, and they're mixing it with these other things. And it's not the people that are the heavy use drug dealers, the ones that are doing fentanyl daily, usually know how much to do and what to do, as scary as that sounds. They're buying it from what they know as a reputable source, is because that person wants to keep their business. So if you give them the same kind of product time and time again, they'll get their high, they'll be able to move on with their life, do whatever they have to do. It's the people that are recreational, ones that are trying it now and again, a student, somebody that's just, hey, I'm gonna do that, and they get a mix of something. The dealer doesn't care, they want their money, so it gets mixed in with different things. And those are the dangerous ones that we're seeing. Can be snorted and injected, those are the two most. Vaping, I've heard about some of that being vaped with the fentanyl, but usually when they get to that point, they're moving on to some other things. So lethal doses of fentanyl doesn't take a whole lot. Again, that's a small amount. Normally, people, when they get fentanyl, it's going to be cut down with some other product to stretch it. So that's a small dose. Talked about most of that. It's cheap. It's now cheaper than heroin. Heroin was pretty expensive because it was pure. And that's that. So, want to talk about this next one, xylazine. So xylazine became prevalent probably about 2 years ago. It started moving West Coast, came into East Coast, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and now we're seeing xylazine here in the Lehigh Valley. So xylazine is a veterinary tranquilizer. Again, not approved for human use. There is no use for xylazine anywhere in the medical field, but again, it's easily made, easily gotten, and people are mixing xylazine into these drugs. So this is the tranquilizer drug. They use it for horses, larger animals, to sedate them. These are the trade names that we're seeing: the trank dope, zombie drug, and xylazine. It's not an opioid. So it can't be reversed. There is no reversal for xylazine. It's very hard to detect. And the crazy thing about this is that people they're taking it because it intensifies and makes their high last a little bit longer. And it's just another effect, a different drug that's getting mixed in. So one of the bad parts that with xylazine is they call it the zombie drug. That's kind of what we're seeing. So fentanyl will knock them down. So a respiratory depressant, what fentanyl does, this depresses it even more. So we can treat the fentanyl with Narcan, but we can't treat the xylazine. So it's very hard to know what you're dealing with. I don't know a lot of times that I'm dealing with this drug until after the fact, or I see some of the signs that you're going to see here in a second that shows me that this person is a repeat offender of xylazine. So what happens is with the xylazine, when they're injecting it, xylazine, typically if somebody's in the xylazine, they're not snorting it. This is an injectable drug. It goes into the intravenous site, so using a needle, and it starts rotting away and necrosing the skin. Two of these pictures are patients of mine that I took into the ED. The one is not, but we're starting to see this. And it's a scary thing. This also started a little bit, people heard of crocodilia. It was when it was going around down in the southern states in Florida. The crocodilia is from xylazine. So we're seeing xylazine in the area. Absolute scary drug. Kensington was, they did a big story down in Kensington. The New York Times did an article probably about 3 to 5 months ago, and it was all on the dope drug, the xylazine. in Kensington, they talked about the zombies walking around. It's looked very familiar to what we had in Allentown 2 years ago with some of the K2, but the xylazine is much, much worse because it's mixed with this stuff. So, real quick, I mean, those are just a couple of things that are like the emerging market in street drugs and what we're seeing, and right in our backyard. And we all know, I mean, I work in Allentown, but Allentown and Reading is what's right in between Kutztown, right? So it's a highway. It's a drug. So I guess what's next, and why can't we, and why are we not tracking it? And I just tried to come up with some things like there are means out there to track it, but there's not the drive behind it. There's people that are dying weekly, monthly, and there's no good source out there to bring this all together. So we have the DEA trying to do their job. They're trying to do illicit marketing, but there's really no real-time data that law enforcement, coroner's offices are able to get all their information into rapidly. But I think it exists. I mean, I put it in COVID. Remember, like when COVID was big, they had the heat maps. Why can't we do that with some of these drugs and track them a little better? The technology's there. Unfortunately, it just doesn't happen. We talked about harm reduction is a big one. And harm reduction isn't new. There was a big initiative by the Biden administration. It fell on its face. But harm reduction is no different than we do it already now. We know that the problem exists. And maybe we cannot combat it and get everybody off it. But what harm reduction is how do we deal with it more safely? How can we work with the addicts to maybe help them, or then maybe get them from to a different, safer lifestyle instead of dying? So we do it in, like I said, in concepts like driving. We have people wear their seatbelts, tobacco use. We talk about cessation. We talk about sex education. We have people doing birth control and that sort of things at a young age, but we're very hesitant to do the harm reduction for our drug addicts. One of the big things that we tried pushing out was the safe syringe product in Allentown, and it fell on its face. That we had tried to get funding to help people. I mean, we don't want them to do it, but they're going to continue to do it. So why not try to help them to, if we can at least get that one step, we get that person to wear their seatbelt. Maybe they didn't do it for years because why should I? But maybe after 3 or 4 years they do. So if we give somebody a safe syringe or give them a safe drug or a place to do it, sounds kind of strange, but it can work. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen. So instead of going to be brief, and I am, we'll leave you with this number. That was a number last year of what we know was drug overdose deaths, 110,000. And that number, as you can see from the graph from 2015, in less than 10 years, we're going to be tripling our numbers this year. So drug overdoses are prevalent. Doesn't matter what walk of life you're in, where you come from. We see them, we deal with them. But that's a shocking number, and those are the only ones that are identified. The numbers that they think are for real are probably almost double that number, but we just can't track them. Sometimes we can't, there's no way to to find that chemical makeup of what's causing the stuff. So that's my spiel, nice and short, but I just wanted to bring you some of the stuff that we're seeing on the streets, some of the things that are happening, and I think some of these things that maybe our youth might start with the vaping, and I think it does actually start to transfer into some worse things. So that's it. Thank you.
Matt, what is Kratom, and do you see that as a trending drug? I just saw a new neon sign in the new vape shop in Kutztown promoting that.
I don't, you know what Kratom? I don't know what it is.
So I've heard of Kratom, but I'm not the expert on it. And honestly, don't know a whole lot.
I've just heard rumors of it. Obviously, I've
Yeah.
researched that it's an up and coming, but
Yeah.
it's legal, but highly
That's
addictive.
scary that they're like advertising it and selling it at the vape shop.
On Main
Yes.
Street. I don't think it's legal,
Right,
but highly addictive.
right.
Matt, the xylazine, Are you seeing that, is it pervasive? Is it a specific age group? Is it across the board?
So I'm not gonna say specific age group, it's for addicts that have been doing this a long time that are finding a new trend to get high and make their high last longer. So I'm not seeing it in first-time users, that's, unless it's mixed in, but most people will ask for the zombie drug or the dope or the trach. They'll seek that out and you can find it. Some of I talk with our drug task force guys all the time because we're with the patients and we try to interact, and they physically ask for the drug. Told the story the other night, but it's younger persons. I had a young lady, 19-year-old girl, who we went to her house for a seizure. She was withdrawing from fentanyl and xylazine. So her boyfriend was going to help her out while she was seizing. He came down and gave her more fentanyl. Stopped the seizure, but it also stopped her breathing. So we were able to get her breathing again. We got her breathing again and talking to her. And she told me that, so 19 years old, very nice young lady when I was talking to her. She is not doing intravenous, but she's snorting fentanyl and xylazine. So it's actually eating the inside of her nasal passages away. And she told me that to prevent that, she's now mixing it in a syringe and shooting it in her anus. I went to the hospital, spoke with the doctor, and she said, I'll take the help, I just need it. So as crazy as that sounds, it's happening because, I mean, if it's going to eat your nasal passages away, it's going to eat your intestine away, your colon away as well. So a 19-year-old girl that's already deep into it, hopefully she got the help. Hopefully she left the boyfriend that wanted to try to save her with fentanyl. He almost killed her. But yeah, so those are the extremes. I mean, that's a younger age. Most of them I'm seeing are the mid-20s to 35-ish range with the xylazine.
Where is law enforcement come into this?
So law enforcement, it's especially with the heroin epidemic that started many years ago. They're not going to if people overdose, they're not going to get arrested. The idea is that we are going to try to get them help, get them into facility. Sometimes they're more willing to talk to a provider like myself, so we try to get to the bigger fish. Somebody that overdoses and has a bag or 2 or 10 of fentanyl, we throw it away. We don't care. What we try to do is get information to try to get to that bigger thing, because they can, I mean, having 1 bag of fentanyl or 10 bags, some people use 8-10 bags a day. And so if they have 8-10 bags, or if they have 40 bags in their house, we know they're a heavier user, but they're getting it from somebody else. So law enforcement tries to work with our patients. I call them patients because they actually are. This is a disease. So they need the help. We try to really help the smaller people to try to get to the bigger things and try to get the bigger bus. Obviously, people are very reluctant sometimes to give out information, but they don't go to jail. They don't get arrested. We try to get them help. Sometimes the system isn't there to help them. We've had the same person overdose in a 12-hour shift 3 times. Not uncommon, because they go to the hospital, they wake up, they sign themselves out AMA against medical advice, and they're back on the street, and it's just a revolving door. So it's hard to get people help that don't want help, but we try. We really do. That's a lot of our job, is to be out there to be advocates for these people.
Along those lines, how do you, as a leader, keep the folks that work with you up enough to deal with this?
Right. It is tough, and I've been there 18 years, and it's hard to fall into that trap, especially when you have that same person for the 3rd time, or especially when we had K2, that we were dealing with the same person multiple 8, 9 times in a week, and we knew them by name. I could write their birthday down before we even got to them because we knew it was William or whatever it was. It's tough. It's hard for the providers to keep that level of care. It is. I'm not going to say that everybody gives the same amount of care all the time because it is very hard to keep that up. I think we do a really good job. We have preventionists ride with us. I carry cards with it. Most of our medics have recovery specialist cards that we'll hand out to people, even if they don't want to go with us, or I see somebody on the street, I can kind of give them a little nudge to wake them up and get them on their way. I try to give them a card and say, hey, this is where you can get some help. But you're right, it's difficult. It's a difficult side of our job to keep that compassion and try to continue if you have that, especially repeat offenders, which it happens.
So with heroin, like you said, it was kind of easy because of Narcan.
Mhm.
So when you get someone who has overdosed on one of these synthetic substances or something, medically, what do you do for them?
So there's a couple of things with an opiate overdose that we're going to look for, signs and symptoms. And if we're questionable, we'll give them Narcan because there's no side effect. I could give Andy Narcan right now. It's not going to affect him whatsoever. It doesn't do anything. So if we don't know, we'll try that, especially if they're unconscious. But a lot of times it's just care, get them to the hospital. There's really not a lot to do. We'll check their vitals, give them an IV, depending. A lot of these people have underlying medical conditions with it because they're not in the best of health. So a lot of times when we don't do it, it's when the ones that are combative get a little bit dicey because then we have to be able to control them safely. And that a lot of times is benzodiazepines or ketamine to knock them down to be able to safely transport. Because again, losing providers is not an option either. So we have to be able to protect ourselves. So we have drugs that are able to sedate them to get them to the hospital. Again, there is, especially with some of these weird K2 synthetic things, it's different weekly, so you don't know what it is. So there is no remedy to it. But if, like in your school situation, if somebody would go down, you know what it is, give Narcan. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. At least we try, right? And it's something, and you can get it replaced. We have a Narcan. We just got a grant for it. We're working on this probably roll out in 2 weeks. We have the Narcan Give program that if we go to a house that somebody overdoses, we're going to be able to give them Narcan to replace what they had before. And so it's a replace give back program. I don't know if I'm 100% in favor of it, but we're going to try it.
Other question. So, I'm talking about high school for a second. How do people that are wanting to help know how to stop the kids from using the new drugs? How do we say, yo, does it help for them to see pictures like you just showed us, or?
You go back years ago and they had those Scared Straight programs.
Yeah.
Back when we were in school, and I don't know if it helped or if it encouraged people to try it. I don't have an answer. A lot of times people, it takes a death in a local area or some kind of tragedy. But again, that might not work either. Some of these things are so addictive, especially the opiates are so addictive. Like I said, I talk to people and ask them. It's all walks of life. It's not just a person on the street. It's a business owner. It's a mother with a child or whatever it is. So you can't pin it down. And I don't know that if you can figure that out.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So again, coming from prevention, we would say start them young. Prevention needs to start talking to kids in high school, I mean, we still want to talk to kids in high school, but like, we need to be having these conversations like from like as young as we can possibly go, like preschool on up. And in the realm of prevention, we're all about if we can teach kids healthy ways of handling stress, handling emotions, and connection, right? Connecting them with healthy outlets, you know, getting them involved, especially, I mean, again, we know what risk factors are. Like, we know that kids that have trauma, that have, you know, homes that have dysfunction in it, right? Those are risk factors. That doesn't mean that every kid, you know, in a dysfunctional home or with trauma is gonna, you know, end up like that. But we know it's a possibility. So we want to really support, you know, if we can identify those kids that these are some higher risk kids, like let's support them. Can we get them involved in Cub Scouts? Can we get them involved in the church? Can we get them, you know, how can we build up protective factors and teach them healthy ways of handling their emotions, handling stress, you know, overcoming problems and obstacles so that hopefully later in life, they won't turn to destructive ways. That's kind of like our premise behind all of this. But yeah, it's hard, it's tough, but we would say like from an early age, as early as we can, you know, teaching kids healthy coping skills and managing emotions and like understanding like healthy people and places and activities, like as much as we can, like to hopefully give them the supports that they need, that in times of crisis, right, they'll hopefully have the skills to handle adversity. But
And it's never too late to start.
absolutely never. You know, we have programs for preschools and kindergartners and elementaries. And again, we're not coming in and talking about heroin, you know, with those kids, but we are going to talk about, you know, like who's a safe person that we can talk to? Like, what are our feelings? You know, how can we handle our feelings? Like, let's practice some deep breathing, you know, let's, you know, read a story about, you know, whatever, to just give them some basic information about, you know, what's healthy and what's not healthy and how we can handle, you know, problems in a healthy way. So, I mean, yes, I would say as young as we can. As far as some of the scare tactics, now, I mean, this was awesome for all of us to see, but I would say no. Again, coming from a basic of prevention, we're all about trying to empower kids and teaching kids skills. Even the presentation that I showed, we wouldn't go into like the nitty gritty of, that's why like he was saying, like, were those programs, you know, like the Scared Straight or even DARE, unfortunately, a lot of those programs that use more scare tactics aren't always proven to be effective, because again, it's giving kids information about like, you know, drugs that we don't necessarily want them to have, you know what I mean? Like, kids already know enough. And trust me, like with social media now, it's even harder, right? To keep kids, you know, they're so informed. So instead it's like, let's focus on the positive. Like, let's teach them some skills. Let's teach them, you know, let's empower them to make good, healthy choices, you know, to, you know, whatever we can to kind of help them lead, you know, healthy decisions rather than unhealthy decisions. But I know it's every day it's a struggle.
At this point, I'm very conscious of the time, since we expected to be done around 8:30 and it's 5:09. But I do want to thank Matt and Teresa for their time and their wealth of information. So thank you. And are there any questions that maybe were not addressed? We can take care of that.
One last question, specifically the Kutztown schools, maybe someone who works there can answer this. What is the level of parental awareness of the actual incidence of, say, vaping in the Kutztown school district? Do all parents receive this type of information, or is it just word of mouth, rumor? My kid's not doing
All
that.
parents are given the opportunity to be in this room tonight. That was pushed out to every single family in the school district.
Multiple weeks.
For multiple weeks. I mean, literally everyone got an email and a phone call that this was happening tonight at this time, and here's what the topic is, if you want to hear it. So it's hard because it's all out there. And it's not like the district is hiding anything. All of our incidences are reportable to the state because we have to, and all that information is publicly available.
It is. So vaping is a problem in our schools in Kutztown, and I would love for you to tell us a success story of a school that did something that worked to
So,
but once it's there.
yeah, so unfortunately, I mean, again, Kutztown Area School District is not alone in this issue. I feel like this is across the board a problem, and I feel like every school district is just struggling on how to deal with this and how to best handle this. And obviously, we're here to provide education and prevention, but of course, that can only go so far. Obviously, like getting the word out and because really it's about, I think, community wise, like just changing this mindset that if everyone bands together and says, this is a problem and we're going to do something about this, which obviously everyone in this room feels that way. But yeah, we need to continue to just reach as many people as we can and educate and say, like, this is a problem. Like, let's do something about it. This is happening. Like, let's try to change what's going on in our schools. But I mean, sometimes it can be just a slow process. I'd say, again, the schools can definitely make sure that their policies are up to date, and I think, again, having, which it sounds like they have, this open, communication with parents, letting them know what resources are available, what programs are available. Obviously, like I said, educating students as young as possible. Again, we're not going to come into, first graders and talk about vaping, but we can talk about making healthy choices and, just it sets the precedent that like every year, like kids are going to, and we teach prevention skills just like we teach science or math, that like these are life skills for kids to have, and not just the students, but the parents as well. Know that this education is happening and parents are involved in part of the process. But I mean, it's tough. It's tough, especially to bring parents on board. But yes, I think the more parents that we can reach, however we can reach them. I mean, again, I've seen some schools that have withheld report cards or whatever it is. Like your kid can't go to the dance, or your kid can't go to the football game, or your kid can't, unless you show up and come. And again, we don't always want to use like threats, but any kind of way that we can, beg and barter and, parents have to, I know like with graduation, like they say like, all the kids, that are graduate, like the parent has to do this before graduation or whatever it is, using that kind of like carrot on a stick just to get the education out there. But it can be tough. It really can be tough. But I'm here to brainstorm ideas. If you want to talk, at a different time, we can certainly partner and collaborate and figure out what will work best for your community.
Again, thank you. There is extra food. We can get in containers. So, and grab a nappa bag, vape donated those things.